Joining us now once again is Chuck Christian, former University of Michigan tight end and also a survivor of the sexual abuse of Dr. Robert Anderson. Chuck, thank you for being with us again.
My pleasure.
Appreciate having you on. So big news this week was that the university, as well as survivors, reached a $490 million total settlement. $460 million of that will go to the approximately 1,050 victims who are current claimants against the university, and $30 million are reserved for future claimants that will be able to claim their settlement by July 31st of 2023. Now, given what we've spoken about previously and the struggle of survivors to have any consistent or any substantial conversations with the university coming to this settlement, now that the settlement has been made, what are your initial thoughts on the settlement and on where this puts yourself and other survivors in your recovery and the future?
Wow. Well, honestly, I had mixed feelings. When I heard the number of 490, I'm like, oh no, we could have done better. And the reason I'm saying that is because we had just got back, Tad DeLuca and John Vaughn and I had just gotten back from Los Angeles because we recorded 2 shows with Dr. Phil. And Michigan found out about those 2 shows that were being recorded, so they decided they wanted to clean house really fast before the show aired. That's why they got rid of Slissel, and that's why they settled it, because the 490 after Dr. Phil would have been $1 billion, and they knew that. That's why they went ahead and settled really quickly.
And you mentioned that the university came to a settlement pretty quickly, especially given the last week or so with the additional scandal and the adjacent scandal with now former university president Mark Schlissel. In the time that led up to that settlement, and especially in the last couple of months since you and I last spoke here on the MegaCast, had that communication with the university at all improved from your perspective or from the perspective of other survivors, between the survivors as a collective or individuals and the university?
No, there was no communication. And in fact, for the last 4 months, I've been trying to speak with the Board of Regents, and I got blocked time and time again, because when you put your name on the list to speak, you have to tell what you want to talk about. And that made it really easy for them to weed me out to make sure that I didn't get a chance to speak. So in December, I said, I'm not going to take this. I'm going to make sure I speak. So they wouldn't let me be on the list. So I said, I'm going to speak anyway. So I stood up and I started screaming, and I waved my hands, and I said, listen, I've been trying to speak to you guys for the last 4 months, and I've been getting blocked, and I don't know how much time I have. So I can't keep playing this game month after month with you guys, because I have a death sentence on me. So I am not going to continue. So I said to the president, can I have 5 minutes? Can I have 5 minutes? And President Slissel said, okay, Mr. Christian, you get your 5 minutes. And then I got a chance to speak. But then in a newspaper, he said, oh, we give the victims a chance to speak. In fact, just last month, Chuck Christian spoke to us. Like, wait a minute, that wasn't the case at all, but okay.
Yeah, and so Chuck, given that there was the ongoing lawsuit, and maybe if there's any benefit of the doubt that can be given whatsoever, and there isn't, to the university, that would be maybe a justification of limiting the speech between the Board of Regents and other administrators and survivors. But the communication issues that were there before there was a settlement, before there was even a lawsuit, right after the news had initially broke about the first initial claimants of sexual abuse by Dr. Robert Anderson, among which you were. And so now that there has been a settlement, given what the university's communication and lack thereof with survivors of Dr. Anderson, with victims of Dr. Robert Anderson, do you believe now that there has been a settlement that communication with the university will improve at all between yourself and other survivors and its leadership?
I certainly hope so, because they need to really speak with us to see how it happened, why it happened, the impact that it had on the victims and all of that, because you can't just fix it if you don't know exactly the impact that it's had on the victims. So they definitely need to improve their communication with us, no question about it.
And so, again, we're joined by Chuck Christian, former University of Michigan tight end and a survivor of the sexual abuse of Dr. Robert Anderson. Of course, earlier this week, a $490 million settlement was reached between the University of Michigan and the collective of victims and survivors of Dr. Robert Anderson's abuse. And so, as you said, you were out shooting an episode of Dr. Phil with other survivors on this very topic itself when you heard the news of the settlement coming in. Since the settlement has been announced, in your conversations with other survivors, and you personally as well, does this help with the healing and even beyond that, more importantly, where does the healing process go from here? Because on one hand, this part of the process, in the wake of years upon years, decades of abuse by this university official, by this doctor, one part of that chapter is closed, but that's not how recovery works. It continues on. It's a constant thing.
Right, it really is. But it was good to see that Michigan really admitted that they dropped the ball when it came to Anderson. And I think that that's what the lawsuit is just saying, that they dropped the ball and they want to make things right. I wish they had just waited till after Dr. Phil to try to make things right. It would have been double. Oh, my goodness.
We're joined by Chuck Christian, former University of Michigan tight end, and also one of the approximately 1,050 current claimants of abuse from Dr. Robert Anderson during his time at the University of Michigan from 1968 until 2003. And so, of course, you also mentioned previously, and we touched on very briefly, the recent firing of former university president Mark Schlissel due to inappropriate emails that he was sending with a subordinate in the university, many of, at the very least, a flirtatious nature, but you could also describe it as a sexual nature as well. Given that they had that issue that was ongoing for years as well, that had just been identified in the past several months, that had been independently investigated in just the past several months, and then, of course, executed in the firing of the former president last week. Given that this is another issue of not quite that same nature, but in the same general area of the nature of other sexual abuse issues or harassment issues, at the very least, on the campus at the University of Michigan, how much more important now, given that this has been an issue, of course, in the athletic department because of the abuse of Dr. Robert Anderson, and in other departments in the university as well, not to mention student body issues that have been an issue at many universities here in Michigan and across the U.S. for years. How much more important because of that, because of this instance, and on top of that, of course, the ongoing investigation and discussions about the abuse of Dr. Anderson, is it to have that communication between the university and victims and survivors of this and other instances of sexual abuse on the campus of the University of Michigan?
Yeah, it's extremely important, because, that's the way you squash things like that from happening. Yeah. One thing about leadership is, part of leadership is fixing problems and not being a problem. And Dr. Schlissel was a problem, but they didn't just find out about this. Yeah. This has been swept under the rug for a while, because that's the culture at Michigan, to sweep the sexual crimes and the sexual inappropriateness under the rug instead of dealing with it. But that's why I say, when Michigan was, because Dr. Phil got in touch with Michigan, and when he got in touch with him, they just started cleaning house, starting with Schlissel, starting from the top down. which is good, but it shouldn't have taken this to make this happen. It should have been something that was done before all this other stuff came up.
We're joined by Chuck Christian, former University of Michigan tight end, and one of approximately 1,050 claimants so far of sexual abuse and assault by Dr. Robert Anderson during his time at the University of Michigan, of which a $490 million settlement was recently reached, of which the current claimants will receive $460 million of that settlement, and another $30 million will continue to be in place for future claimants through July 31st of 2023. And so now that the settlement's been finalized, how do you and your fellow survivors go about continuing to tell your stories and to tell the importance and to preach the importance of tackling these issues in institutions and tackling these issues in our society seriously and with vigor, given that while this settlement has been made, the problem itself doesn't go away?
Exactly. We've settled our case for the most part, but this is still a problem. This is still a culture. This is still something that what we really have, John, Tad, and I have been trying to do is to help people get their voice back, because a lot of victims don't have a voice. They don't feel like they can speak out about these things because there's so much shame involved. But for me, there was no shame for me, because I was supposed to have been dead 3 years ago, according to my doctors, from cancer. So when they gave me the opportunity to speak out, I said, yes, I'll speak out. I'll be the first one to come out and say that, I was the first football player to speak out. And but that was because, I had nothing to lose. And I was not about to just sit back and watch Michigan continue to play this game and to keep sweeping things under the rug. And that was what was driving me. And I couldn't just sit back and watch it happen. And then once John and Tad and I all got together, because I just met John and Tad 4 months ago, and but it feels like we've been best friends forever. And once we got our heads together, we just started working together, and we became a lot more powerful as a team. So that's why we decided to continue to work together.
Well, Chuck, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us and giving us more insight on the perspective of the victims of this abuse at the hands of a doctor that was employed by the University of Michigan for several decades, from 1968 to 2003, as well as where the victims and the survivors go from here to continue to tell their story and get the important message out there of addressing these issues head on and addressing them seriously.
And another thing too is the show is going to broadcast on the February 1st and 2nd. So it's a 2-day show, because Dr. Phil said this is so powerful, we need to use 2 days for it. And that's what we're doing. So I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about helping people get their voices back and to eliminate the shame, because it's too much of that.
Well, we appreciate your time, and thank you very much for joining us, Chuck.
Welcome. My pleasure.